Oh, there he is. Okay.
I meant to put in a plug for Jennifer's movie because it's cool. When Wire Was King.
Okay.
Maybe I don't want to interrupt this if you have a way to get.
So you want me to start? Yeah. All righty. Commissioners. I got commissioners going all kinds of things. If everyone can take their seats, we will get started. All righty. Bringing order to the chaos. Excellent. All right. Good afternoon, I guess almost afternoon, everyone. I'm Bryan Tramont. I'm the managing partner at Wilkinson, Barker, Knauer. We are looking forward to our conversation with our global regulators. We're lucky enough to have two FCC commissioners as well as representatives of the Greek and the Canadian regulators with us today. To my left is Anna Gomez, an FCC commissioner. Next up is President Masselos, which I just like calling you President. I think that's it's a better name, of the Hellenic Telecommunications and Post Commission. Next up is Adam Scott, who is the Vice Chair of the Canadian Radiotelevision and Telecommunications Commission, or the CRTC. And finally, Commissioner Geoffrey Starks of the FCC. So welcome, everyone. I'm going to try to weave together a few of the different themes we've heard this morning, and also maybe tee up a few things we'll be discussing tonight in our breakout sessions at dinner. Our last panel spent a lot of time on broadband, and so I'd like to start with a little bit of a table-setting exercise, if we can. The audience may not be as familiar with the Canadian and Greek broadband markets as two of our panelists. So let's start there. And Vice Chair Scott, if you want to start first, maybe just give a brief overview of broadband deployment in your country and some of the biggest barriers you're facing and any other themes that you picked up on from the last panel, how you're addressing those challenges, and then we'll turn to the President.
Sure, happy to start off. So I think the Canadian geographic context, obviously very different. When we're talking remote, we're talking extremely remote. The line we like to use is that the challenge is not the last mile, the challenge is the first 1,000. So including just recently, we did announce funding for a 1,000-mile fiber link to Nunavut, one of our northernmost territories. Very expensive, very hard to do, very important because these are people who need the services. So the remote challenge is extreme and has been a priority for both the regulator and the government as a whole. Various pools of money to fund it. Our equivalent of the Department of Commerce has a $3.25 billion fund. The CRTC, as the regulator, has $150 million a year that we get from industry revenues. And then in kind of the rest of the country, where most of the folks live, we've got extensive cable deployment. So about 80+% of the country is covered by cable, which means we've got access to DOCSIS. Fiber to the home, I think we're pushing kind of that 60 to 65% coverage for fiber to the home now. And we're about 40% of households, 4 million households, so about 30% of households are actually buying internet at gigabit speeds. So pretty good uptake, pretty good deployment. The challenges are the same. It's the uneconomic portions are really hard to reach. And then, of course, there's still folks who can't afford it.
Kostas?
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for having me here as a speaker. I'm really grateful to you and to TPI for having me here. I will start from European Union and then go to Greece. So European Union has defined strategic ICT objectives in the Digital Decade Policy Program 2030. Connectivity objectives are included there, and the two objectives call for 1 gigabit per second fixed connectivity for everyone in European Union until 2030. And the second one is 100% population coverage with wireless technology at least equivalent to 5G. By 2030 as well. They try to be technology independent in defining the objectives, but this is clearly a call for fiber to the premises and 5G, of course. What is the status today in European Union? 5G coverage is 89%, and coverage with C-band is 51%. In rural areas, this is much lower. As regards fiber to the premises, coverage is 64% in European Union. And if we consider fiber to the premises and cable, together the coverage is 75%. This is what we call very high capacity networks in our terminology. Greece is doing better than the European Union average in 5G, so coverage with 5G in Greece is 98% today, in C-band 59%, and but we are doing worse in fiber to the premises, where coverage is 38%. But still, in the European Union, there is a discussion that we should improve compared to other regions in the world. We see that we need to do more about 5G because 5G deployment so far is based on dynamic spectrum sharing, using spectrum of 4G. Rural areas are less covered today, and the take-up, which is quite important, still needs to be improved. So we need to work on policies to create an investment-friendly environment, to attract investments from the private sector. We need regulations to optimize network deployment costs. Recently, the Gigabit Infrastructure Act has been approved in Europe. And we also need to address the demand side, because in the end, we want these networks to be financially viable in the long term, but also accessible to the end user. So we need competitive prices. So these are the objectives of the framework. Of course, there are several challenges. I would say that today the most important one is the migration from legacy networks like copper network in Greece to fiber to the premises. And there are several issues in there. One critical point, for example, I would like to discuss has to do with converting homes passed to homes connected. This is not easy. And if you consider countries with a lot of old buildings like Greece, this is not an easy one. It requires a lot of effort and is a real challenge.
Excellent, thank you. So we picked up on a few challenges, a few common ones that are shared across the countries represented. Commissioners, from your perspectives, how's it going overall in the broadband market? And then what do you see as the key challenges going forward? Commissioner Gomez, you're unlucky enough to be right next to me, so let's start with you.
So we do have broadband deployment in this country, but we also have our challenges. A lot of our challenges are because we are a vast, very diverse country in terms of geography, topography, population density. I just got back from spending a week in Alaska, so I now understand a lot more of your situation. But you know, on the good news front, our last broadband deployment report says that we have broadband deployed at 120 megabits per second to 24 million Americans, 19 million in rural, 700,000 in tribal. And a lot of that is good. Of course, we also, I'm sure the last panel spoke about the funding that we are using for infrastructure right now. But unfortunately, in order to have sustainability, we need continued support for high-cost areas. And on the affordability front, we really need to make sure that we can have a program that helps subscribers meet the costs of broadband. If we don't have that, then we really do risk having unsustainable networks. So this is my first plug for Congress to please refund the Affordable Connectivity Program.
And I will second that plug. And I doubt it'll be the last time that Commissioner Gomez and I foot stomp that. So thank you as well to TPI for hosting us as ever in such a lovely, lovely setting. Thank you for allowing me to participate on this august panel. You know, I was thinking about it. I don't know if folks were around yesterday, but it was a beautiful day here in Aspen. And then around whatever 6 p.m. or so, the rain came. And I was thinking about, the state of our union on deployment. It seems a little bit apropos. I'd say it's sunny with a chance of rain. As we heard and even the panel before us, the $42 billion broadband equity access and deployment BEAD money is the biggest program that we've ever had to get work there. It's working with states, and so it's the national level, it's the state level, local level. All that is going to be a 4-year build-out cycle there for that BEAD infrastructure. And so I think the promise of digital equity and connectivity everywhere is as good as it ever has been, but there's a chance of rain. As Commissioner Gomez mentioned, the ACP funding for our vulnerable households, our low-income households, that program has run out of funding. I think that is a grievous a policy issue that we have got to correct as quickly as possible. The other thing that I'll hit on really quickly, of course, is that the $9 billion universal service program that we administer at the FCC was also unfortunately declared unconstitutional recently by the Fifth Circuit. And I won't really get into, it was an en banc panel that overturned an underlying panel. All that's not really interesting. But the fact of the matter is that we are still operating our universal service program that it provides high costs, it provides Lifeline, it provides rural hospitals with connectivity, and then of course the E-rate program helping our youngest learners. But that is going to be an issue that is absolutely going to have to get solved. There is a circuit split, a multi-circuit splits there. And so that is a legal issue that is absolutely going to have to get worked out here.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. President Masselos, can we bring you back in on this adoption topic that you raised a moment ago? Are there any programs in Greece or in the EU to drive adoption, particularly among low-income consumers, and anything that's been successful or unsuccessful in ways that the world might learn from?
Well, indeed, I said before that we need to develop policies that will create an investment-friendly environment and also address the demand side. And I would also like to say that, of course, we use public funds and subsidies both for the supply side, because in less commercially interesting areas, it's very difficult to deploy, for example, fiber to the premises. So there are several instruments at European Union level and at national level. So at European Union level, we have the biggest one, the Recovery and the Resilience Fund and Connecting Europe Facility. At national level, we have used frameworks to address the demand side. We use the voucher scheme to incentivize the migration from copper services to fiber to the home.
Consumer vouchers.
Yes, consumer vouchers. And this is the reason why we managed to move from 0% penetration of fiber to the premises in 2018 to 10% today. Of course, on the network deployment, the situation is better. So we started with 0% in 2018. Today we are 39% coverage. But take-up is more difficult. The demand side is more difficult. Voucher scheme is one thing, and we still use this. Another thing, and this is something that we did not expect, has to do with the lack of personnel to do the final connection for a fiber to the premise subscription or service, and the reluctance of the subscribers to accept this because of the nuisance and disturbance the technicians cause in a household or in an apartment. So we need to reconsider how we address this challenge, because it might be a real barrier for the adoption of fiber to the premises.
So there's a global issue of get off my lawn, basically. I don't want all right, Commissioner Scott, what about the Canadian side on stimulating demand, so consumers, low income in particular?
Yeah, so we do have a program, and credit where it's due. It's largely championed by the private sector, with definitely a role for the public sector. The role for the public sector primarily was to do with validating eligibility. So the program's tied to participation in income support programs, started with kids and has expanded to seniors as well. private sector was really reluctant to offer low-cost services to people who didn't really need them. The validation is tricky. You don't want people walking into your store with their tax forms to show that they're eligible. So the government handles that part. So that was the public service contribution, was we kind of run the black box where we check your information, ensure that you're eligible. You're sent a code in the mail. You go to a website, you enter that code. There are more than 15 participating ISPs. And now there are 2 levels of service. There's a $10 a month service, which is relatively slow, at 10 meg down, 1 up. For $20, you can get 50 down and 10 up, which is our kind of broadband target.
What's the adoption rate of the people who get that little code in the mail?
The adoption rate has been poor. It's challenging from a number of perspectives. I think a lot of it has to do with trust. If you look at who are the most trusted organizations in the country, federal government and the phone company tend not to make the cut. And especially when you're dealing with, low-income Canadians, recent immigrants to the country, people who have had maybe negative experiences with the government, the target population does not have a tremendous amount of trust in the government. So that's something we need to work on for sure.
It continues to be a problem. Did you want to jump into that question or no?
But I would say, 2 things I would say. First of all, I remember when iPhones first came out, and I didn't understand why it was something you would want to have. Obviously, I am now a big fan. But trusted community organizations are so important when it comes to take up of broadband, or anything. Back when we did the digital television transition, we partnered with trusted community institutions. Back when I worked at NTIA, we had we had funding where we would fund senior centers, community centers, Boy Scouts. We would fund organizations that would go out and train folks on digital literacy and explain to them why take-up was important and how to do it. And maybe, as you said, you don't want the government showing up at your home in order to set up a TV antenna, but a Boy Scout may actually be more trusted in that arena. So these are just lessons that we've learned throughout the decades of experience that I have.
As an Eagle Scout, I appreciate the plug for the Boy Scouts, by the way. Do you want to jump in on that? Maybe
absolutely. I agree with all of that. And if you look at the numbers, how the ACP program has really gathered a lot of momentum. It was very hard at first. The numbers were very slow at first because of that exact issue of trust. These are vulnerable households where you don't just knock once on that door in order to get them enrolled in this program. And so momentum really came, and it was just a real pop. But to zoom out, I think the issue of affordability is absolutely critical. When I first became a commissioner, I'm from Kansas originally. Yes.
Oh, there we go.
Yes,
It had to be
absolutely.
Jake.
Go
I was okay. I was like, where is she?
Go Chiefs. The issue of rural connectivity is absolutely critical, full stop. But the issue of affordability, and especially through the pandemic, we saw that tens of millions of households simply could not afford the connectivity that we. I think yeah. I will be heard. I will be heard. And making sure that we could help those vulnerable households has been absolutely critical. The last thing that I'll say here is, ACP was actually funded through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, and so it turns out that the BEAD build-out actually is married with the ACP, and the fact that ACP has lost its funding mechanism is actually causing reverberations in BEAD. There's an affordability requirement in BEAD, and so the fact that you don't have ACP kind of undergirding that really has caused some tension, and no doubt my fellow panelists, you see the intersectionality and interconnectivity of a lot of these policy decisions, and so affordability is a really important, critical issue.
I'm picking up that you support ACP being refunded. Is that correct?
Third call.
So I do want to stay with you for a moment, though, because the president raised this issue around workforce, and I know it's an issue that you've cared a lot about. So maybe if you can jump in a little bit at the workforce challenges in the U.S., and then we'll bring in our Canadian colleague as well.
Absolutely, and on the issue of 5G build out, one of the issues is making sure that we have enough of the workforce, and that includes the whole kind of chain there from engineers and designers and architecture, infrastructure, to the workforce that can actually implement and execute and climb those towers, get those millimeter waves. All of it is an absolutely critical thing, and one of the things that I've worked across the commission on, including with Commissioner Carr and I, have worked. He climbs poles, I don't. But the fact of the matter is making sure that that workforce, of course, represents America, looks like America, is absolutely a critical issue for me. We were out at Virginia State University together in HBCU talking about how we help to make sure that the workforce meets the moment.
Commissioner Gomez, did you want in on that? I couldn't tell. You're good?
I don't climb towers either.
Okay. Fair enough. All right, well, I'll go to you on this one. Broadband, whether it's fixed or mobile, requires significant infrastructure. Providers have raised various concerns about the barriers, including permitting and things like that, and the costs. How much of this is an issue, and what do you think should be done about it? And we'll ask that across the panel.
Yeah, we do hear about this. There's a lot of challenges, and especially now that we have a lot of funding, so you're going to start seeing a lot of deployment happening at once. There's going to be a lot of permitting that has to happen. Again, having just come from Alaska, hearing from all of the challenges that they have in planning for their deployments. They have a lot of deployments that are ongoing right now because of existing funding. And permitting on federal lands is a real issue. So I'm really glad to see that the administration has a permitting action plan and is working to streamline, modernize, and simplify, for example, NEPA reviews, which everybody's familiar with. One of the things that we heard about in Alaska is the different entities that may be providing some of that permitting have different NEPA review requirements, and how much of that can be streamlined would be really good. I know also that NTIA, not at NTIA anymore, but they're in my heart. I have been working on solutions to help the providers understand their permitting requirements, and I think that is going to be very helpful as well.
President, the EU's done some work on this front, and a white paper and what have you. Want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, maybe I could very briefly respond to two of the questions.
Feel free, knock them out.
Okay, one was about the universal service and how it is funded in Greece. The universal service is funded by the operators, but currently does not include provisions for low income. It's just provision that everybody should be connected in some way, so this is the obligation of the universal service provider. This is one thing, and the second one was about subsidies. Subsidies and public funds are everywhere in the European Union, in all different member states, and European Commission improved the state aid regulation to make it simpler. Now, about the investment issue. Indeed, this has been a discussion in the European Union since the beginning of 2022. The issue is that telecom operators in Europe claim that their financial situation is quite challenging, and the investments required to achieve the connectivity objectives of 2030 might not be easy. It's difficult. There were different studies estimating the investment needs for European Union. So one of them gives an estimate of 227 billion euros to achieve connectivity objectives by 2030. So, European Commission published a white paper earlier this year in February and presented data that really prove that the financial situation of telecom operators in Europe and their attractiveness for investments is not good. So we need some regulatory intervention to solve this. And the white paper presents some ideas. The key points of the white paper, this has been the work of European Commission. The key points are, first, that there should be a kind of level playing field between the telecom ecosystem and the cloud ecosystem, because there is a convergence. The second, that we need harmonization of regulation across European Union member states. And this has to do with authorization, spectrum assignment, security, and these kind of things. Third point, a new access policy for fiber to the premises deployment. So again, harmonization as regards wholesale products across Europe, or relaxation of ex-ante regulation to attract investments. And the fourth one, the concept of cross-border consolidation, the idea of having one core network for different EU member states. So this has been published for consultation. Consultation has been concluded. I think that when the new commissioners are appointed in November, we'll see the next steps for this.
Very good. Vice Chair Scott, do you want in on this infrastructure easing the way for folks to deploy?
Sure, because I think it's easy to get caught up in the digital economy and all the exciting, stuff that happens when it's done, and we tend to forget that the digital economy is built by folks with hard hats who are climbing towers. So it's really an important part of it. It's civil engineering. We've got some jurisdictional challenges in Canada. So a pole isn't always a pole. If it's a telephone pole, CRTC regulates it. If it's a hydroelectric pole, falls under provincial jurisdiction, so it's not even federal. I'm still optimistic that as we increasingly recognize the importance of getting this stuff done, that some of those jurisdictional issues will fade away and we'll start to cooperate a little bit more, both at municipal, provincial, territorial, and the federal level. It's just got to get built.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your optimism. We're with you on that. I want to stay with you for a moment. There's been a large debate about how online platforms should participate in contributions towards network deployment or other regulatory regimes. Tell me about how you think about that in Canada, and I know you have a particular regime that maybe I think the audience would be interested in hearing about. And then for the whole panel, how should we be thinking about them contributing to, particularly on the infrastructure side, if they should at all? So you want to start?
Sure, and when you get the job as Vice Chair Telecom, nobody warns you how much broadcasting work you're going to be doing. And that's certainly been a top of mind issue for us. So really, I think that's the example you're talking about, Bryan, so we're not looking at, we don't have anything currently in place to have the platform providers funding infrastructure directly. But we do in Canada have a very robust and long history of broadcasters contributing to the creation and promotion of Canadian content. Right? When you live next to America, the largest outputter of TV and music production in the world, it's a top concern. So that's really what's at stake for us is Canadian culture, Canadian storytelling, the diversity of the Canadian experience being reflected in our broadcasting system. So it doesn't get much more important than that. The system historically was based on licensed broadcasters getting the rights to distribute US content, which is very profitable, drives advertising dollars, drives subscription revenue, and then a portion of that revenue gets allocated to the Canadian production community to tell Canadian stories. That all gets turned on its head once the global streamers start coming in. So advertising revenue is down, cord cutting takes effect, there's less money available for supporting the cultural industry. So 2023, Parliament passes an act that creates a new category of broadcast undertaking. Online undertakings are now captured in the Canadian broadcasting system. We put out two relatively quick regulatory decisions. One says if you've got $10 million in Canadian broadcast revenue, you need to register with us and do a pretty basic level of reporting so that we know what's going on in this space. And then the more recent one was if you have over $25 million in Canadian broadcast revenue through your online streaming, you're required to pay into the system. As you can imagine, that has not been particularly popular amongst those who did not used to have to pay and are now required to do so. So we'll definitely see that play out in the courts, and we've got a pretty ambitious regulatory agenda ahead of us on the broadcasting side, really just to deal with the reality that the broadcasting ecosystem around the world has changed, and Canada's got to make sure we keep pace so that we can keep achieving those important goals.
So would anyone else like to jump in on the tech platforms contributing to broadband infrastructure?
I think the only thing that I would add, of course, is for our universal service, the contribution factor is consistently above 20%, 25%, even at certain times well above 30%. And so it is clear that there is something broken about that fundamental system. Congress, of course, we continue to look and work with them for guidance, for help, for assistance here. The fact that our, again, universal service was deemed unconstitutional, we'll see because of the circuit splits whether that will end up at the Supreme Court. But I think Congress is a great place for us to get some additional help.
I would say, I agree, we're going to need legislation in order to be able to assess non-telecom providers. So one way or another, Congress does need to act. And the working group, the bipartisan working group, has actually come up with some really interesting proposals. I think the most important thing that we need to think about, besides having a sustainable universal service fund system that permits competitive deployment and strong innovation, is whatever contribution reform we do implement, we need to think about how that will affect the cost of the very services that get assessed.
Absolutely. Anything on that? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, introducing new regulation for direct remunerations from over-the-top or digital platforms providers to telecom operators has been another famous debate in European Union since the beginning of 22. It came up, it was revived because it has been discussed in the past, in 2012 and 2017. It came back as an IP interconnection market failure that should be considered. But so far, what we see is, and an example that was used in a European Union debate was the example of South Korea, where this issue is somehow regulated. In South Korea, a digital platform is considered as a user of the internet, according to the Telecoms Business Act of South Korea, so has to purchase access. So it's the access that is regulated, not the termination. But anyhow, in the white paper I discussed earlier, there is a proposal for establishing a dispute resolution mechanism between over-the-top service providers, digital platforms, and telecom operators for this kind of issues. My personal opinion is that I don't think digital platforms are free riders of the internet. They contribute in many different ways. But on the other hand, telecom operators in Europe operate in a very strongly regulated environment, and their business model, if we agree that there is an investment gap, then their business model faces certain challenges.
Very good. I'm going to, Commissioner Scott brought up broadcast a little bit, so I want to throw out a question on that because CanCon is obviously a priority for the Canadian regulators. Diversity in content and ownership are a challenge for everybody around the world. How are we doing in the U.S.? And we'll also, the same question goes for Greece. Do you want to start, Commissioner Gomez?
Sure. It's so important to have diversity in content and ownership for a lot of reasons, but primarily because we want to see broadcasters who made a bargain for the use of the public airwaves to serve the public interest and to serve their communities. And so therefore, that should reflect their communities. What's the state? It still has some challenges, has room to grow. I like to talk about Latinos a lot because I am Latino American. Thank you. Latinos are almost 20% of the U.S. population. And young Latinos are 25% of the U.S. population. What a market. What a market. And yet, Latinos are the largest users of online streaming because that is where they see themselves. They don't see themselves on traditional broadcast. It's improving, but that is why it continues to be so important that we continue to promote innovation and diversity in the market.
Do you want to in, Commissioner Starks or President Masselos? Sure, jump in.
Well, I mean, broadcast is not part of our mandate. However, we see the challenge of content fragmentation. And I can give an example recently announced by two of our telecom operators that offer also pay TV services. They agreed that with an subscribers of one platform, pay TV platform, with some small extra cost, can have access to the sports content of the other. This is maybe one idea that could be considered. The other, is quite different. The introduction, or we may consider a kind of pay as you view model instead of subscription model.
Subscription-based models. Interesting.
Yes, this is something that I have focused on as well. I agree with everything Commissioner Gomez said. Everything from who owns to who is working for broadcasts. It is imperative that we have diversity there. When you look at the ownership numbers of diverse folks, when I first became a commissioner, I used to say when you're talking about African American ownership of radio, of television stations, if you actually round it, it would be 0%. The numbers are better today. I think we have for full power TV stations, I think it's close to like 2%. When you look at Latino ownership, when you look at ownership by women, all of the numbers are lower than they should be. And so there's work to do. One of the things that I have focused on, and we voted on quite recently, was EEO, to make sure that we know what employment looks like at our broadcast stations. I think that's going to be very helpful for us to make sure that we know who's helping, who sits in front of the camera, who's helping to make those newsroom decisions, who's behind the camera. All of that really goes to making sure that it fully reflects America. The other thing that I would say that the Commission has voted on recently is something called geo-broadcast, which is helping to get geo-targeted content for FM radio station, allows boosters to get geo-targeted content out within their domain. And it really is an innovative way that we've seen. A number of small businesses came to me, a number of civil rights organizations came to me, came to the FCC and said that this is the innovation that we're really looking for inside particularly radio where revenues have been down. And so making sure, again, that we have ways that we can continue to drive innovation, drive excellence here.
Great. I want to try and do a few quick hit questions if we can. There were a couple panels this morning about AI, and I was curious just to touch base with each of you about how AI is impacting the regulator's role and how you see it playing out and changing or not changing your remits.
Everybody says this. There's a lot of benefits to AI, and there's also a lot of negatives to AI. And we are definitely exploring both sides. We've taken action on some specific issues with artificial intelligence with regard to robotext and robocalls. For example, making it clear that artificially generated voices and texts are actually covered under the TCPA, and robocalls and robotexts that are unwanted are prohibited. We've taken enforcement action against providers that have violated that. We have also proposed having robocalls and robotexts alert the receiver of a message that it uses artificial intelligence. But we've also said at the same time, how can we use artificial intelligence? How can it be beneficial to prevent robocalls and robotexts? And I'll let Commissioner Starks talk some more, because if I just go through the whole litany, then he won't have anything to say.
Does anybody else want to jump in on this? Anybody else on this one?
Well, just to piggyback on that, that's exactly right of what we're doing. I think
first.
Always.
Thank you.
To zoom out, I think it is, as the Biden administration executive order on this has focused, I think each agency, each executive branch should be thinking about what is in their jurisdiction, what can they be doing. But I think this really is a whole of government issue, like so many of the complex, large, hard questions that we need to solve, like national security. I think it is a whole of government issue that we're going to be working with for quite some time. I think the last thing that I'd say as well, and I'm as bullish on AI as anybody else. I was just reading on on getting here to Aspen, frankly. A Goldman Sachs report that is really talking about the hard question of the investments that are going into AI right now. Is it ever going to actually pay off for itself? There's so much money going into it. But you know, the scale that's going to be needed in order for those investments to actually have the return on investment, the ROI that private sector is going to need, it's still an open question. And so I really kind of only highlight that in the sense of, I think it's still very incomplete. We're all trying to figure this out. We probably will be for quite some time. But this is going to be an issue that absolutely is going to stick with us. And we'll figure out how we can manage it the best way and make sure that it is altogether a positive for not only for Americans, but of course for humans everywhere, I think.
I want to pivot. Did you want to jump in on this one? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah,
Yeah,
a couple of comments. Well, of course, AI carries a lot of promises and a lot of concerns. I expect AI to be quite useful also in the telecom sector as a tool. For example, as regards power management and optimization of networks, dynamic radio planning and dynamic spectrum sharing, and also network predictability using machine learning. As regards the governance, we have, of course, the AI Act in Europe. Governance model is two-level, centralized at the top level in European Commission, with European Commission. At national level, also some responsibilities are foreseen. I know that some electronic communications regulations in European Union member states got already mandate under AI Act. Not the case for us. We are still waiting our government to decide.
very good. Commissioner Scott, I want to bring you in on spectrum, something near and dear to your heart. Before the commissioner came to CRTC, he was over at ISED, their spectrum regulator. What steps has your government taken to free up spectrum for 5G? What more is needed to happen, and how do you think you're doing?
Yeah, so I'd say we're doing pretty well. I think that you and I first met, I think, at a 5G conference, which I think was branded at the time as the race to 5G.
Yeah.
And the presentation I gave, I remember, I wasn't as interested in winning the race as I was in making sure that citizens benefit from 5G. So that's the lens I've always applied. I think maybe I've been proven a little bit right. I used a video game analogy at the time. I said 5G is like Minecraft. It's not like Mario Kart. So it's not a race where you just need to cross the finish line. It's that you need to decide what it is that you want to build. How are you going to benefit? You define the terms by which you win. So I'm interested in 5G to the extent that it improves the social and economic outcomes for Canadians. That's my goal. I'm not interested in winning a race. Having said that, I did do some of the mid-band 5G spectrum. So I ran the 3500 spectrum, ran the 600 megahertz spectrum. Got to set the framework for 3800, but handed off the keys to the spectrum auction team to take my current job. So the spectrum's out there. It's in the hands of at least 4 large players and a number of smaller players within their regions. So I think we've set the framework for strong competition in the mobile industry, and folks are starting to roll it out now. Certainly, if you're in a major city, you're getting the 5G indicator on your phone. And that'll push out and push out and push out. And then we've got millimeter wave spectrum kind of next up in the auction queue. It's funny the things that you miss. I don't miss having to remember all the numbers and acronyms and who calls what band, what.
Julia McHenry's laughing over there, by the way. Empathizes with your remark.
Yeah, but running those auctions was definitely a highlight of my career. It's a really interesting aspect of what we do as regulators.
All right, Commissioner Starks, you want to go before Commissioner Gomez this time so you get the first mover advantage?
From my perspective, had the great benefit of being in Dubai for the ITU, probably like I see many in the room that I know were also there, and seeing both international harmonization, some of the very prominent things that we're working on there, 6 gigahertz, what is the future of licensed, unlicensed? Satellites was just a huge issue that we were all working on very hard for USG. And of course, the national spectrum strategy that for the Biden administration, laid out the goal was 1,500 megahertz, and almost time and a half, almost double, is executed there in the spectrum strategy, almost 2,800 megahertz. Now we're in the execution phase, and so there's a lot that is happening right here that we're working hard on. Again, this is obviously I don't have to tell folks something that is across the government, working with our friends and colleagues at DoD, NTIA, so many of these partnerships and having the kind of internal working groups work extraordinarily well are absolutely going to be imperative for helping Americans.
President, you want to jump in on this one, 5G? Sure.
Yeah, two very fast remarks. One is, I think 5G brings a change in the way we think radio access networks. So 5G calls for a shift from macrocells type of development to micro and picocells type of development using millimeter wave spectrum. And this can lead to significant energy savings. This is one thing. So millimeter wave is important. The second one is we should not consider 5G as only a way to download faster our video in our smartphone or increase the resolution. We should consider also the production side of 5G. So we need 5G applications in different sectors like logistics, transportation, tourism, health. So we need to consider the part of 5G that contributes to the economy, not only the consumption part.
That's a good point. So our last 706 report showed that 91% of Americans have 5G coverage, which means 9% don't, and 36% in rural, and I forget what the statistics is in tribal, something like 20% in tribal. So, we're doing pretty well. Obviously, there's always a great thirst for wireless and more spectrum. But one of the things that the Commission is working on, of course, is the next 5G fund, which is to target support for areas that are uneconomic to serve without some kind of support. The only other thing I would say is, since I just got back from Alaska, we did go visit a small, very small carrier who is building out 5G in Kotzebue. It will provide to 10 communities in the surrounding area 5G wireless services. It already provides 4G, which is pretty extraordinary for if you see how remote and low populated this area is. So it's a great opportunity even in these very remote rural areas.
Excellent. We're going to do one last quick exit question because we have a breakout session tonight on the role of satellite, and we've heard a little bit about satellite this morning, about its role in the marketplace. Do you want to just give a quick hit on how you're thinking about satellite going forward in the competitive landscape and what the Commission needs to do?
Oh, we've seen so much exciting work on satellites. Now, I heart satellites because of my old life in the International Bureau, so I'm a little biased, but this has gotten to be such a big issue, such a big area, such an explosion of new services that we created a whole new bureau. The chairwoman created a whole new bureau to do that. So there's a lot of...
There's our chief. Hi, Julie.
Oh, is Julie here?
Yeah, she's right back in the back row. She's backbenching it with Dave.
Hi, Julie.
With Calpac, yeah.
Hi, Calpac. Calpac and I go way back.
Okay, anyway.
Anyway.
So I'll be at the dinner. I'll go to that. You can go to that breakout session.
There's a lot of exciting opportunity. I'm very excited at the potential for the... I can never remember what SCS stands for, but direct-to-device, sorry. I'm sorry, Julie, for forgetting. Thank you. Supplemental coverage from space, and that's one area that's very exciting for us to talk about.
Yeah, I believe a satellite can contribute to our connectivity objectives, especially, recently low Earth orbit satellites with low latencies can be a very interesting alternative for connectivity, especially in rural areas. We have worked a lot with Starlink to allow them to introduce Starlink in Greece. Also, we are in touch with Kuiper. And also, the other interesting thing is the direct-to-device connectivity from lower orbit satellites. This is another interesting point.
Yeah, and that's really one of the things that has me most excited about it. We've been planning for a while to have satellite fill a role in kind of closing the gaps. But one of the other gaps we've been looking at is that mobile road coverage in particular. So we've got phenomenal mobile coverage where everybody lives, but that's not where everybody is all the time. So if you're going down a stretch of highway and you've got a car accident or some other tragedy, and we've certainly had our share of tragedies in Canada, particularly for Indigenous women. So there are stretches of road where awful things happen and there's no mobile coverage. Where you need it the most, it is not there. But there's also just tons and tons of roadways. So how do you even start to cover it all? It was going to be a massive investment. Now we've got a potential technological solution on the horizon to at least address part of that gap. It's really exciting in terms of the things we think it can do.
Commissioner Starks, bring us home.
I'll close us out. Direct-to-cell supplemental coverage. The thing that I really have noticed in the in the satellite space, there really has just been such dynamism, and really the need for, from a regulatory standpoint, and this comes with setting up the Space Bureau, really the need for us to be able to work faster. And be able to be more nimble, get more licenses processed and moved, and really moving at the speed of innovation. And this has been some of the most dynamic, innovative space that I've seen. I had a CEO come see me not a month or so ago, where they're talking about the different chemical, compounds that can be manufactured literally in space. And I said, go with God. We're rooting for you. But, the satellite, the ability for what the constellations are going to do, we know more providers are working hard and looking to come. It is just such a dynamic place. Orbital debris, of course, is something that we should be mentioned as well, and no doubt will come out at dinner tonight. And it is an exciting time to be continuing to look forward to working with our space and satellite partners there.
Very good. With that, a round of applause to thank our terrific panel. And then I'm going to turn it over to Scott, who will transition us to lunch outside, I believe.
Yes, let's make it a fast transition. We are now going upstairs to the courtyard for lunch, and it's a buffet lunch, so get in line, get your food. And then we're going to talk about trust safety, content moderation, another issue, very timely. So let's move on out. And then after that, you can go hiking.